Shana Tova. I consider myself very lucky that I have a job that lets me wear a kippah every day. Not just because that's how I choose to express my Jewish identity. There's more to it, and some of you may know what I'm talking about. The other reason I love wearing a kippah is because it's hiding something. Yes, you guessed it. It's my bald spot. And I don't know what happened, because my hair used to be so good to me. And every time now I look in the mirror, all I can focus on is that there's just less and less of it. Some of you may see me as a kid, but I can't help but look at myself in the mirror and wonder, who is that looking back at me? Who is that in my reflection? When did I start getting old? When did things change? And I wish I could say that life was so simple, that the thing keeping me up was the hair that's on my pillow. But that's not the only thing I don't recognize. And I know I'm not the only one who feels lost in a world that feels like it's changing so quickly. I'm sure you all feel it in your own ways too, but I really feel it right now when it comes to being Jewish. You know, when I was a kid, I loved being Jewish. I loved Jewish culture. I was Jewish, and that made me different from my neighbors, but I never thought of that as a bad thing. I loved being the one dark house in December when Christmas time rolled around. I loved that when I was in middle school at Schechter, whenever my friends made a good play on the basketball court, when I high-fived them, my instinctive thing to say was Yasher Koach. As if they'd taken an aliyah to the Torah, but, you know. My parents let me stay up every night until 11, and I watched Curb Your Enthusiasm reruns. I watched them every single night. I knew every line of the first 4 seasons of that show. And more than any other rabbi or historical figure, Larry David was the person shaping my identity. Being Jewish was great. I had a blast. But something feels like it's missing now. All of a sudden, there's a heaviness to being Jewish. And I felt that this year as a rabbi, I would be doing a disservice to you all if I didn't express to you what I felt being Jewish right now. Because I feel like we're at an inflection point. Right now, there are more and more people out there telling us that being Jewish is suddenly a bad thing. There are those out there who would equate Zionism with Nazism, face zero repercussions for what they say, feel no remorse, and have no desire to look into history. When enough of that outside noise seeps into our consciousness, how can it not affect us? How can it not change how we feel? I can no longer deny it, that much as it pains me, my relationship to Judaism is changing. It has changed. I feel nostalgic for something that existed only a few years ago, but it feels like it's been a lifetime. And I'm far from the only one to notice these changes when it comes to being Jewish. Over the last week, I've been reading Sarah Hurwitz's book, As a Jew, her second book in which she puts our contemporary Jewish identities into a historical context. In the book, she tells a story from 2002 when she was going around promoting her first book. She was visiting college campuses, and she went to Hillel to promote her book. And one of the students there asked her, how did you, when you were a student, navigate campus anti-Semitism? For this student, it was a huge problem. She's just trying to go about her life like every other student, but she was faced every day with campus anti-Semitism. And so she asked Sarah Hurwitz, how did she herself deal with it? And Sarah Hurwitz explains that it took her a minute to even grasp the question. She didn't understand it because when she was in college in the late 90s, there was no college anti-Semitism. Never once did her religious identity or politics affect the way she was as a student. It just didn't exist for her. And needless to say, that terrain has changed. In a conversation between Sarah Hurwitz and Dan Senior on his Call Me Back podcast, Dan Senior opened up about it, the way he too has been feeling his Judaism changing. He was reflecting that his son is now a 12th grader in a Jewish high school, and just how different the Israel education that son got when he was a young student looks from the education that the young students are getting now. How do you explain to a class of kindergartners what's going on? How do you explain to them about the hostages, that there are bad people out there who want to hurt us? These changes happened so fast that we didn't even notice. Rabbi David Wolpe tells a story of a trip that he and his daughter took to Paris some years ago, and he explains that he went to the Louvre and to the Jewish Museum on consecutive days. And the first day, they went through security at the Louvre, like everyone, but on the second day, they went to the Jewish Museum, and the security was so much tighter. And he turned to his daughter and he asked, Did you notice that at the Jewish Museum we had more security than we did at the Louvre? And his daughter looked at him and said, Of course, it's the Jewish Museum. For one generation, that was a surprise. For his daughter and her generation, which is my generation, that's life as a Jew. It's jarring to look at that reflection, expecting to see one thing and having the realization that you don't recognize who or what is staring back at you. For so long, we thought our lives as American Jews looked a certain way. But these last few years have shown us that we are in a very different reality than what we had become used to. All of a sudden, we have to be on the defensive about being Jewish. We have always been the minority. But as one rabbi might put it, being Jewish feels lonelier now than it ever has before. And if all of us Jews were to look in the mirror the way that I find myself doing now, what will we see? Something we recognize? Or is it entirely different now? Last year, Frank Foer published an article in The Atlantic, The Golden Age of American Jews is Ending. Foer gave language to what I've been feeling, explaining that we reached the peak of our Jewish experience in the 80s, 90s, and the 2000s. As Jews living in America, we were on top of the world in the fields of entertainment, of public office, of sports, and more. He explains that Ralph Lauren was the biggest name in fashion, never mind that his name was formerly Ralph Lifshitz, and he was a graduate of the Manhattan Talmudical Academy. A third of the Supreme Court justices were Jewish. Joe Lieberman was very nearly the Vice President of the United States, and he was an observant Jew. Schindler's List won 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director for Steven Spielberg. Seinfeld was the most watched show on television, and Adam Sandler's The Hanukkah Song, a nod to all those Jews who feel lonely at Christmas time, listing all the proud Jewish celebrities, was all over the radio come holiday time. For a whole generation, if you were to say, Harrison Ford, a quarter Jewish, everybody would know that the response was, it worked. Okay, not too shabby. Harrison Ford, a quarter Jewish, not too shabby. We all knew the words. Even non-Jews knew those words. And Jewish pride was abundant. I'm especially looking back at the yesteryear of our Jewish past this holiday season, as next week marks the 60th anniversary of Sandy Koufax. And I can just say Sandy Koufax, and a lot of the room will know what I'm talking about. But for those who don't know, Sandy Koufax sat out Game 1 of the World Series in 1965 because it coincided with Yom Kippur. And he decided that his Jewish identity was more important than baseball, even during the World Series. With good reason, it's that moment that we still talk about 60 years later. We idolize him because his decision meant you can be the most famous and successful athlete in the world, but still stand up and be proud to be Jewish. It was an event that was bigger than sports, and he was never criticized for choosing his Judaism over his team. He was praised. As a side note, as the story goes, he felt confident sitting out that night because he had faith in his backup pitcher, Don Drysdale. Don Drysdale, I guess, is the reason he's a footnote in history. Drysdale struggled, and the manager pulled him out of the game early. And Drysdale, joking about his poor performance, said to the manager, "I bet you wish I was Jewish today, too." And so Sandy Koufax sat out that Game 1 loss, and he still won MVP of the series, as the Dodgers won in 7. That's how big his influence was. It was a watershed event for Jews, one that happened before at least a few people in here were born. But to this day, it still remains one of our proudest moments. But it was 60 years ago. Our world hasn't become more united, it's become more divided since. I can't imagine us having another Sandy Koufax moment now. Being Jewish is just different today. And over these past few years, we're all coming to terms with that. For Sarah Hurwitz, it was waking up to the reality that anti-Semitism is accepted, even common, in places that had never been before. For Dan Senior, it was the realization that the lessons he taught his children are no longer enough. And for David Wolpe, it was the epiphany that Jews are less safe than other groups, and that is just a fact of life we are helpless to change. And now, like those three, I too am taking that long look in the mirror. I realize that no matter how much, not just the Jewish story, but the American story has been shaped by people like Sandy Koufax, Steven Spielberg, Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David, and Mel Brooks, that is not enough to make us impervious to hatred. And so we're left to navigate a new reality, figuring out what that means. How can we not keep looking in that mirror and wonder, what are we seeing? Do we still see ourselves? Or is this something entirely different we can't wrap our heads around? We are a people who clutches onto our collective past, and we try to figure out why it looks so different now. We are collectively taking that long, nostalgic look, coming to grips with the new reality, knowing the old one's no longer here, but figuring out, how do we move forward? For me, being Jewish has always been that source of joy. It has touched every aspect of my life. I wouldn't be a rabbi without it. And in many ways, I'm prouder to be Jewish than I ever have been. But I think even more, and I'm afraid even more, I'm scared. With every negative headline I read about Israel, I can feel it physically affecting my body. Maybe that's even why I'm losing my hair. What will Judaism look like going forward? What will it look like for my children? Being Jewish feels just heavier than it ever has in my lifetime. I'm trying to look in the mirror at the hair I still have left, but all I can see is that metaphorical bald spot that keeps on growing. And as we have no choice but to adjust to this new reality of our American identities, I wonder, is this what's here to stay? Is this what our Jewish lives are now for good? Or is this just a bump in the road? A road we have driven down before. We've got some new twists and turns, but it's familiar. Yes, a certain golden age has come to its close. So what's next? On the one hand, I feel like we're in our new normal. I hope I'm wrong, but maybe this is just the start of something that gets scarier. It's terrifying not to know what's next. But on the other hand, as we've always done, we'll look at our history. Isn't what we are experiencing just what it is to be Jewish? The details have changed, but we've seen these patterns before. Today we read the story of the binding of Isaac, and it's a story that's familiar to all of us here. Of course, we know about the sacrifice that would be, and Abraham taking his son to the altar. But I think there's a piece of that story that's often forgotten, which is the ram. Abraham looks up when he's about to commit the sacrifice, and he sees a ram in the bushes. And there's a midrash about the ram. The rabbis try to explain to us what's going on. They give us a little bit deeper meaning on the ram. And as the midrash goes, Abraham did not only see the ram one time on that fateful day. It happened multiple times on the day of Isaac's would-be sacrifice that the ram tried to run to Abraham. But each time he did, his horns got caught in another bush, another bramble. Then the ram would free himself before getting caught in another and another. And Abraham watched this ram get stuck over and over again, and he tried to understand what it meant. And in the Midrash, as God explains to Abraham, the father of the whole Jewish people, this is what life will be like for your descendants. They will be as numerous as the stars in the sky, but there are people who will deal with struggle. Like the ram, they will constantly be caught and ensnared in one exile after another. The rabbi said this is a sign of things to come in Babylonia, in Greece, and in Rome, and beyond their purview later in history. Expelled from Spain, harassed and kicked out of their homes in Arab lands, slaughtered in Europe, and on through the generations. One day, God tells Abraham, that cycle will end. But I find myself wondering, when? When does that cycle end? We are that people who have constantly lived with struggle. That is who we are and who we've always been. I wish I could say life was so simple as to have Judaism be about bagels and lox. But it is with good reason that the root of the word Israel in Hebrew translates to struggle. Being Jewish inherently means we have to deal with difficulties, to wonder about our fragile existence. And right now, I feel like we're all collectively that ram once again. We feel stuck, another generation ensnared in the bushes. And it's easy to keep on focusing on what was, to lament the past that no longer exists. But this is not the way to get out of the bramble. We have to imagine what is next. And we have to remember we are far from the first generation to take that long look in the mirror and realize we have no choice but to learn from it. Not only how to live in this new reality, but to succeed. We are not the same people who lived in the shtetl of an era long gone, nor should we want to be. No doubt it's easier to fall back on what is comfortable and pine for a reality that no longer exists, but ultimately that's not the way forward. And society has always been caught in this battle between nostalgia and modernity. The word nostalgia comes from the Greek, meaning the pain from an old wound. When we long for an age gone by, that pain comes from knowing we can't recapture what was. It's hard to look in the mirror, not recognize who is there, to ache for something that no longer exists. Yes, I wish my hair still went down to my shoulders, but I can't imagine what that would look like. And we can't turn back the hands of time. We should instead focus on using our history to guide us towards what's next. One of Rabbi David Wolpe's most famous stories, something he imagined one day, that he was talking to his great-great-great-grandfather, and he was having a conversation, and he was telling his ancestor how hard it is to be a Jew now in America. And he was saying, things are so bad. You won't believe the anti-Semitism that Jews are experiencing at Harvard. And his grandfather responds, there's Jews at Harvard? And he says, yes, but they hate Israel. And his grandfather says, there's an Israel? Judaism lives in that tension between the past and the future, between history and modernity. And in many ways, that's what Rosh Hashanah is as well. This holiday forces us to look back. We reflect on all the wrongs we committed in the year that passed. And we don't do that to dwell on what we did wrong. We do it instead to move forward. That's the way to growth. Rosh Hashanah asks us to look back, only to move forward. And so this Rosh Hashanah, we're all going to take that long look in the mirror. We're all going to be tempted to see what used to be, the hair that is gone, the color it used to be before it turned gray. We're all going to wonder when those wrinkles formed. But what will it take for us to see past those imperfections? What will it take to start this new year as an opportunity not to dwell on the past, but to change our perspective? I have no doubt we're going to face challenges ahead. But with those changes, I also see opportunity for creativity, for new ideas that will inspire this next generation of Judaism. May we always remember that no matter how unrecognizable the reflection may seem, at our hearts and our souls, we're still the same Jewish people, and we can still see that promise for a hopeful future. Shana Tova.